evening. How is everybody today? Yay! I have a couple of really special books that we're going to read from. First of all, the book of Mark from the Bible, the English Standard Version, and secondly, the Bronze Bow. So, thank you, one person, for showing up. I appreciate you. We appreciate you. Yay. Oh, hi, Granny Bear. Have you, Granny Bear, I have to ask you, because I know you haven't been on while I've been there a couple of times. Have you been able to catch up? There's no judgment there. I'm just wondering. But you might be lost in the sauce if you haven't been following along. So we are in chapter 11 of the book of Mark. This is the English Standard Version, like I already said. And I'm going to go ahead and just get started. Yes, okay, good for you. Isn't this a great book? I love this book. Great, 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 great. Okay, chapter 11. Now when they drew near to Jerusalem, to Bethphage and Bethany as the Mount of Olives, at the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent two of his disciples and said to them, I'm going to turn the sound off so that that chimey thing doesn't keep coming. Jesus sent two of his disciples and said to them, Go into the village in front of you, and immediately as you enter it, you will find a colt tied on which no one has ever sat. Untie it and bring it. If anyone says to you, Why are you doing this? Say, The Lord has need of it, and will send it back here immediately. And they went away and found a colt tied at the door outside in the street, and they untied it. And some of those standing there said to them, What are you doing untying the colt? And they told them what Jesus had said, and they let them go. And they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their cloaks on it, and he sat on it. And many spread their cloaks on the road, and others spread leafy branches that they had cut from the fields. And those who went before and those who followed were shouting, Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our father David. Hosanna in the highest. And he entered Jerusalem and went into the temple. And when he had looked around at everything, as it was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. It was already late. That's interesting because I always think of Palm Sunday as being in the morning, mostly because that's when we go to church. But I always think of Palm Sunday being in the morning, but apparently it was in the afternoon because it was already late. On the following day, when they came from Bethany, he was hungry, and seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to see if he could find anything on it. When he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. And he said to it, May no one ever eat fruit from you again. And his disciples heard it. And they came to Jerusalem, and he entered the temple and began to drive out those who sold and those who bought in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. And he would not allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. And he was teaching them and saying to them, Is it not written, My house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations, but you have made it a den of robbers? And the chief priests and the scribes heard it, and were seeking a way to destroy him, for they feared him, because all the crowd was astonished at his teaching. And when evening came, they went out of the city. As they passed by in the morning, they saw the fig tree withered away to its roots. And Peter remembered and said to him, Rabbi, look, the fig tree that you cursed has withered. And Jesus answered him, Have faith in God. Truly I say to you, whoever says to this mountain, Be taken up and thrown into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes what he says will come to pass, it will be done for him. Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. And whenever you stand praying, forgive if you have anything against anyone, so that your Father also, who is in heaven, may forgive you your trespasses. And they came again to Jerusalem, and as he was walking in the temple, the chief priests and the scribes and the elders came to him, and they said to him, by what authority are you doing these things, or who gave you this authority to do them? Jesus said to them, I will ask you one question. Answer me, and I will tell you by what authority I do these things. Was the baptism of John from heaven or from man? Answer me. And they discussed it with one another, saying, if we say from heaven, he will say, why then do you not believe him? But shall we say from man? They were afraid of the people, for they all held that John really was a prophet. So they answered Jesus, we do not know. And Jesus said to them, neither will I tell you by what authority I do these things. We will read chapter 12 tomorrow. We are coming to the end of the book of Mark. There's a lot more left, but not very many chapters, so they're kind of long. But that's okay. All right. So now we've got the bronze bow. And we are still lacking. I don't know why he cursed the tree. That's always been kind of a puzzle to me, and I don't really understand that. However, he did, and it happened, and I think the lesson was about faith of move mountains or something. Okay, so I think we're still missing Rebecca. I thought she said she was ready, but did she not? Yeah, she said ready. I need a hot, gooey, low-carb brownie. 60 degrees here and falling. Wow, 60 degrees sounds great in San Antonio. All right. So if Rebecca's here, then let me know, but I'm going to go ahead and start. So I'm not really sure. She did say she was ready on our group chat. But I'm going to go ahead and start. This is chapter 12. Oh, I need to give you guys the there was a lot that happened in the last couple of chapters. So let me just go through it real fast. We read 10 and 11 last time. In chapter 10, so the grandmother had just passed away. He went to Rosh and told him that he needed to take care of his sister. So he came back, and Simon offered him the shop, his blacksmith shop that he had, Simon the Zealot, and that was really amazing. And so he went back. There was a little bit of trouble getting Leah to move, but they wound up doing it by carrying her in a litter with all the there were curtains on all the sides so she couldn't see out. Hi, Rebecca. We're so glad to see you. Okay, so they carried her out in a litter, and then he got to the shop, and Simon had told him that he has to treat the Roman with respect because apparently there's a soldier that comes and gets help sometimes, and Daniel, sorry, the main character, did have to do that one time, and I think the Romans saw the Leah, and so he gave him the bridal ring is what he needed to make. Okay, so anyway, we're going to go on to chapter 12, and here we are. Kimberly Sneven. Yes. Okay. Kimberly's here. Yes. Yay. All right. Chapter 12. Late one afternoon, a village boy came into the shop with a scythe to be mended. He had a bony, weather-toughened face under a shock of straight black hair, a defiant, touchy alertness, and a blackened eye that roused Daniel's curiosity. As Daniel examined the blade, the boy paced the length of the smithy floor. Sit down, Daniel suggested, jerking an elbow toward the bench near the door. The boy, unable to sit for more than a moment, resumed his nervous pacing. Daniel set to work, blowing the waning fire with the bellows, heating and pounding straight the blade, then applying the sandstone to the nicks that the pebbly land had left. From time to time he glanced at the boy. Daniel seldom had words to spare for his customers. He did the work they required of him and took their money, not caring that he had a reputation for being surly. Today, for the first time, he was prompted to speak. For one thing, the boy was about his own age, and for another, he looked like a fighter. When he could make himself heard, Daniel attempted a joke. Must have been quite a scrap you were in. There was no answering grin, but Daniel tried again. What did you give him in return? There was a pause. Then, what could I? The boy burst out. There were 5 of them. Daniel's eyebrows lifted. He bent over his work. My own friends, bitterness rasped through the boy's voice, waited and jumped on me coming home from the field last night. Why? Because my father has gone to work for Shomer, the tax collector. No wonder the boy looked defiant. It was a contemptible business for a Jew to hire himself out to collect the taxes the Romans did not stoop to collect for themselves. There are better ways of earning a living, Daniel observed. He's worn out trying. Last year it was the locusts, and this year it's some cockle seed got into the grain and the crop isn't worth harvesting. He could never meet the taxes. Daniel said nothing. He could have sold my sister. There would have been no shame in that, but he's too soft-hearted. That's a hard choice, Daniel agreed. They forced it on us, the cursed Romans. The land would feed us well enough if we were rid of them. Daniel leaned closer on the stone and carefully ground out a slight roughness. But it's not true what they said, the boy went on. My father would never put 1 penny of the taxes in his own pocket. Daniel did not answer. A tax collector might start out honest enough, he reflected, but a man weak enough to take the job at all would find it hard to resist the easy pickings. He felt embarrassed. It was a bad thing for a boy to have been ashamed of his own father. I guess this will do, he said, rubbing his thumb along the blade. He knew the boy did not want his sympathy. The boy paid him and moved toward the door, hesitating. Daniel guessed the shrinking with which he looked out into the twilight street. Any chance they'll be waiting again? He asked. The boy shrugged, but his eyes looked sick. Hold on a minute, Daniel suggested. When I close the shop, I've got to deliver an axe head. We can go along together. I can take care of myself, the boy flashed. I don't doubt that. What's your name, by the way? Nathan. Then come along with me, Nathan. There's something I'd like to tell you about. There was not much use talking, however, to one whose ears were straining for every sound on the dark roadway. Daniel could almost feel the tensed muscles of the boy beside him, but he observed with approval that the nervous stride did not falter. He gave up any attempt to talk and walked on in silence, savoring with keen pleasure the thought of the coming attack. He had not realized how much he had missed this rising prickle of anticipation. The rush came quickly out of the darkness. 6 or 7, Daniel noted, even while his fist sent the first comer sprawling. With a shout of sheer enjoyment, he caught 2 others, one with each hand. In the dark, there was a shriek, "The blacksmith!" a frantic wrench, and the sound of tearing cloth, and one of the captives darted off in his tunic, leaving his cloak in Daniel's hand. The other, teeth rattling from a shake and a kick that would be remembered, stumbled after him. Then Daniel stood watching while his new friend dealt efficiently with two young attackers. Not bad, he commented, when the whole pack had slunk into the shadows. You need to tighten your guard. Now, that's over, and you can pay attention to what I have to say. How would you like to use those fists of yours for a good purpose? So Daniel won his first recruit in the village, Nathan, son of the new tax collector. As though Daniel's very eagerness had somehow acted as a signal between them, a few days later Joel walked into the smithy, bringing with him a recruit of his own. How did you know where to find me? Daniel demanded, eyeing with curiosity the slender, scholarly boy who accompanied his friend. I ran into your friend Simon, Joel told him after just the slightest hesitation. He told, excuse me. Oh, sorry. He told me you were looking out for his shop. He suggested I come to see you. A good thing, Daniel said. I was wondering how I could get to Capernaum. There's business enough for two men here. He tried to sound matter of fact, but he could not keep the pride out of his voice. Joel showed a flattering interest in the shop. He wandered about, picking up the tools, weighing bars of metal from one hand to another. He was impressed with the shining gleam of a newly finished blade. I've brought someone who wants to join with us, he said. Kemuel feels as we do. Daniel looked uncomfortably at the newcomer. The boy was plainly wealthy and used to having his own way. There was an edge of disdain in his voice and in his proud, handsome face. Yet there was something else, too. The new boy whirled suddenly round at him. Do you mean to fight them? He demanded. Or are you playing a game? I came today to see if you are serious. We are serious, said Daniel levelly. What right have you to ask? Because I am tired of words, the boy answered. Everywhere men talk and argue while Israel lies helpless at the feet of Rome. Where is our courage? Why does no one dare to step forth? If you mean to fight them, then I am with you. But I have no use for children's games. A feverish light burnt in his dark eyes. He reminded Daniel of a panther, lean and dark and fiery, and his own fire leapt up to meet the boy's. He forgot his suspicion. You're welcome here, Kemuel, he said. You'll find we're not playing a game. Yes, Joel had chosen well. Strong arms and muscles were easy to find. A fiery spirit was not so common. Presently Nathan stopped by on his way home from the field, as he had formed a habit of doing. Already Nathan had lost his resentful air. At first awkward in the presence of the city boys, he soon surrendered to Joel's friendliness. Daniel disconnected the bellows, banked the fire for the night, bolted the door, and the band of four held its first meeting. Certain of Simon's approval, Daniel offered the smithy as a gathering place. They agreed to meet on the third day of each week. If you want members, Nathan offered, I could name you 10 here in our village who would give their right arms to join you. Daniel hesitated. I've thought about that, he told them. I know there are plenty. If word went out tomorrow, half the village would probably be with us before night. Some because they love Galilee or hate the Romans, and some just because they love a good fight. But would they lose heart? The trouble is, we can't fight tomorrow. We've got to work slowly, and it may take a long time. How long? Kemuel demanded. We must be strong enough so that we cannot fail. Daniel tried to remember how Rosh had talked to them in the cave, whetting their impatience, but always holding it back, leashing for the day to come. He saw how much he still had to learn from Rosh. Right now we need members who will be willing to work without any reward, he went on, not looking at Kemuel, but speaking chiefly to him. We've got to be absolutely sure we can trust them, no matter what happens. Then we shouldn't take too many right away, Joel said thoughtfully. We should not make it too easy, Kemuel spoke. We only value the things we pay for. Who has money to pay? Nathan bristled. That would keep out all the villagers. I was not speaking of money, Kemuel answered with a touch of scorn. I meant we must be committed altogether without any reservation. Only that way can we be sure. We will each take an oath, Joel reminded him. His friend was not satisfied. An oath can mean one thing to one and something altogether different to another, he argued. Daniel suspected that he argued habitually and enjoyed it, like the scribes who debated the fine points of the law. I know. Nathan sprang to his feet. He seized a rod of iron from the wall near him. We can brand ourselves. That way we would know. Are you forgetting the law? The scholar cut in icily. You shall not print any marks upon you. It was exactly as though he had pulled his cloak tighter to avoid contamination. Peasant, his tone had said unmistakably. Daniel's heart sank. Already his little army was behaving like the men in the cave. We don't need a brand. Joel spoke quickly, in the reasonable, friendly way that made everything he said so convincing. If we choose carefully, we can trust each other. We will carry the sign of the bow in our minds, you know, from the Song of David. He trains my hands for war so that my arms can bend a bow of bronze. That is our password. Within 3 weeks, the four members had increased to 7, then 9, 12, 16. Young men would meet each other on the village streets, in the school at Capernaum. Did you ever see a bow made of bronze? They might ask in passing, or they would drop in at the smithy and pick up a lump of metal. It would make a good bow, they would say. Password gave them pride and pleasure. They were bound together by the sign. On the first day of Ab, 21 boys crowded the smithy. Daniel looked around at them with a surge of elation. When can we call, can, blah, blah, blah. When can we tell Rosh? Joel demanded, eager for another glimpse of his hero. Not yet, Daniel answered. He could not tell even Joel how he dreamed of the moment when he would tell Rosh. Now, while Joel read aloud to the listening boys the thrilling accounts he had shared with Daniel in the passageway of Daniel and of Judas Maccabeus, Daniel thought of how he would lead Rosh down the mountain and confront him with an army ready for his command. Then Rosh would no longer be an outcast. Then everyone would recognize the leader they had longed for, and the day would be very near. On the morning after the third meeting, the fair-haired Roman soldier appeared again at the smithy. This time he had a broken stirrup to be mended. He paid no attention to the sullen scowl that showed that his business was unwelcome. He stood, his feet planted well apart in that Roman pose they seemed to learn young, looking deliberately about the shop, at the shelves of metal bars, the tools hanging along the wall, the door that Daniel had instantly shut between them and the inner room. Daniel kept his eyes on his work, fighting down a compulsion to find out what the man might be looking at. Could there possibly be a sign of last night's meeting? He did not draw an easy breath till the Roman, taking his time about it, finally clanked through the door, mounted his horse, and rode off. Then, searching the room frantically, he could find nothing that could possibly have drawn the man's suspicion. Had it been his imagination that the man was looking for something? The Roman returned. Sometimes on the very day of a meeting, often on odd days between. He came now with work for his fellow legionaries, or with ridiculous excuses to have some perfectly sound bit of harness checked for a flaw. Once or twice Daniel, hearing the hoofbeats in the street, looked up to see the man ride slowly by the door, and then, almost immediately, so soon the man could scarcely have turned his horse, ride slowly back again. He discovered the prints of a horse's hoofs in the soft earth of the alleyway that ran along the garden wall where there was no possible reason to ride a horse. No question now, the house was being watched. The meeting place would have to be changed. A new recruit, son of a farmer in the village, offered a solution. He led Daniel to an abandoned watchtower in his father's cucumber field, a small round stone house in which the whole family had once lived during the time of harvest to watch lest thieves despoil the ripening crop. Below the tower a shaft had been cut, designed, Daniel suspected, for hiding part of the crop from the count of the tax collector. It made a fine place to store the weapons they planned soon to have. The tower could be approached from many sides across the field of vines. It was an ideal meeting place. Abruptly, almost as soon as they shifted the meeting place, the Romans stopped coming. Warily, they stationed a guard near the new headquarters, taking turns at the duty. Not a sign of the soldier was ever reported. Luck was with them, Daniel decided. Still, there was something about it that made him uneasy. Chapter 13. First word is Daniel. Everybody enjoying the story? I see that we've got another person. There's 4 people now, so that's Granny Bear, Mom, Rebecca, and question mark. So please make your comments so that I know who it is. I'm glad to have you, so welcome. All right, chapter 13. Daniel's chief doubt about the new meeting place that it would take him from home for long hours at a time resolved itself more simply than he expected. Leah listened to his explanation and seemed to grow accustomed to his absences, as she had once accepted the fact that her grandmother must work in the fields. Leah was gaining confidence. She did not tire as readily at the loom. She had even completed a length of cloth which had been paid for by the servant of the widow of Chorazin. When Daniel had laid the shining silver talent in his sister's hand, she had been bewildered. He realized that she had never before known any recompense for her hours at the loom. He showed her how to sew the coin into her headscarf, where every village girl, even the poorest, boasted the jingling coins that would be her dowry. Leah was as enchanted as a child. Now she always wore the headdress as she worked, and from time to time her hand stole up to touch the coin. Underneath the scarf, the long yellow hair was always combed and carefully arranged. Was it the work in the little garden that had brought a faint flush to her pale cheeks? One afternoon, looking through the door of his shop, Daniel saw 2 figures coming slowly along the road in the shimmering waves of heat. One, he soon saw, was Joel. The other he was not sure of. A new recruit? The 2 figures were almost at the door before he recognized with a shock of pleasure that the one who had come with Joel was his sister Malthace. She wore a yellow mantle. Yeah, my guess is Kimmy also. I don't know. Now we're down to 3, so I don't know. She wore a yellow mantle with a green embroidered girdle and a green and white striped headdress that showed just the edge of the dark sweep of her hair. I've never been in a blacksmith shop before, she exclaimed, sweeping back the headdress in the impulsive gesture Daniel always remembered first when he thought of her. I've been begging Joel to let me come to see it. Embarrassed, Daniel wiped his sooty hands and brought a jar of water from the house, wishing he had more to offer. I'd like to ask you to come into Simon's house, he began. It doesn't matter. It's lovely here in the shop, said Malthace quickly. The 2 visitors sat on the bench and watched him complete the lock that he had promised to deliver before sunset. I'm glad you came today, Daniel told Joel when the work was done. There's an apprentice I want you to meet over in the street of the weavers. I think he wants to join us, but he has some foolish ideas in his head that the rabbi has taught him. I can't talk him out of them, but you could. Go along and see him, Malthace suggested. I don't mind staying here alone. I'd rather start back when it's cooler. Are you sure? It would take only a short time. Sorry. Oh, sorry. It took considerably longer time than Daniel had reckoned, because Joel and the young weaver lost themselves in the intricacy of a theological debate. It was nearing sunset when they started back toward the smithy. "He's going to be one of the best we have," Joel said, "but you should have stopped us. When I get started on an argument, I forget what time it is." He did not seem to want to hurry, however, and shortly it appeared that he had something else on his mind. "I've put off telling you this," he said finally. "I don't know just why. I saw your carpenter again." "Was Simon with him?" "Yes. As a matter of fact, when I told you that day that I'd run into Simon, that wasn't altogether true. I went back to Bethsaida on purpose. I went back several times. Lately I've been getting up early to hear Jesus when he talks to the fishermen." Daniel was surprised. "You think he will help us?" Joel hesitated. "He has helped me. He has explained several points of the law that have always puzzled me." "Explain them to you? You're the scholar. He's only a carpenter." "I don't know where he got his training," Joel said, "but he knows the scripture. Some of his ideas are the same as father's, only he seems to go beyond somehow. He has a way of making something very clear and uncomplicated, so that you wonder why you never thought of it that way before." "The first time I heard him," Daniel said, "I thought that if only he and Rosh could join together." "I've thought so too. So many people follow him. Some mornings there are more than 100. If anyone could persuade them, but then again, I'm not sure. I wish you'd come to listen to him, Daniel. Every time I hear him, I wish you were there. We both think." "Does Kemuel go with you?" Joel laughed. "Not Kemuel. I persuaded him to go once. He was horrified. He's too much like father. No, Thacia goes with me. Oh my word, I forgot Thacia. She'll be furious at me." The girl was not in the smithy. As the two boys stood uncertainly in the doorway, a soft murmur of voices drifted through the inner door. Surely it could not be. Then Daniel heard the quick, light peal of Thacia's laughter. "Wait here," he told Joel. There was no one in the inner room. Beyond, in the small garden, two girls sat side by side on the bench. "Oh, Daniel!" Leah cried, catching sight of her brother. "Thacia came to see me." Dumbfounded, Daniel stared from one to the other. "How—" he stammered, and then caught the warning in Thacia's eyes. "Don't spoil it." Her look cautioned him quite plainly. He could think of nothing at all to say, could only stand stupidly. How had she managed it, when no one, not a neighbor or an old friend, had been allowed to see Leah's face for almost 10 years? "We've been having a lovely visit," Thacia said, as casually as though it happened every day. "Leah has been showing me her vegetables. The time has gone so fast. We had so much to talk about. These two, so utterly different." "What could you talk about?" he burst out before he could stop himself. Mischief danced in Thacia's eyes. "You," she said. He felt his ears redden. He knew he would never know how she had accomplished it. Girls were strange creatures. He could not understand them. But he could see the change in his sister's face. She was fragile and pale beside Thacia's vivid beauty, but smiling with a smile so like their mother that it caught at his throat. Joel, impatient and curious, came through the inner door. It was too much to hope that the miracle should include him too. At the first glimpse of him, Leah's bright face grayed with fear. Thacia motioned him out of sight. "My brother and I must go home now," she said gently, "but I will come back soon. You won't forget me, will you, Leah?" There was no answer. Leah's head was bent. The folds of the scarf that hid her face were trembling. "Here's something to remember me by," said Thacia. She undid the green embroidered girdle from her waist and laid it gently across Leah's knees. The gold threads twinkled in the afternoon sun. God be with you, she said quickly, and not waiting for an answer, moved past Daniel through the smithy too quickly for him to stop her or to try to thank her. Daniel stood looking down at his sister. He saw one finger slowly move out from the veil and touch the girdle, tracing the scarlet and blue and purple threads as though they might vanish at too heavy a touch. It was the first beautiful thing she had ever owned. Baisha's visit caused Daniel to look at his sister with new eyes, and one thing that he had never noticed before suddenly shamed him. She spent all day weaving fine cloth for a wealthy woman, and she herself was dressed in a faded gray rag. Next morning he took down the jar in which he kept the money his customers gave him, counted out a handful of coins, and made his way to the market. It was a confusing place, the kind a man did well to stay away from. The booths of the weavers were surrounded by women, chattering like a woods full of sparrows, fingering the lengths of scarlet and purple, bargaining with sharp, accusing screams. He gathered his courage and approached, trying to ignore their derisive glances. Presently he found what he wanted, a length of smooth cotton, the clear, fresh blue of the kitsa blossoms. How much? He growled. A girl with gold earrings studied him shrewdly. Blue dye is rare, she said. 2 shekels. He knew it was too much. He had no way of knowing how much too much, and he had no knack for bargaining anyway. He paid the money and cursed himself when she did not hide her contempt. Thread? He glared at her, when she had found it for him. Do you have a needle, too? He asked. The girl laughed. We don't sell needles. Surely your wife must have a needle. He said nothing, but the flush creeping up his cheeks made the girl laugh again. Oh, she said, a present, is it? Wait a minute. She delved beneath a pile of odd articles. Here, take one of mine. I won't charge you for it. The fine gesture, he could see, was an apology for the scandalous profit she had made on the cloth. He took the package and walked away, his ears red. Leah could not believe that the cloth was hers. Just to touch its smooth surface seemed to give her such joy that Daniel did not dare to suggest that it had a useful purpose. He waited for 2 mornings before he brought out the needle and thread. Leah watched his clumsy experiments, fascinated. Suddenly a squeal of laughter broke from her, so startled that he dropped the needle. He had never heard her laugh before. The breathy little sound died away as he stared at her. Oh, Daniel, you hold it like one of those great iron things. Give me that. Can you thread a needle? He asked, astonished. Anybody can thread a needle, Daniel. Would you be angry with me if I made a dress out of the blue cloth? Through the door of the smithy he watched Leah spread the cloth on the floor, marveling at the capable way she turned it this way and that as she cut. Praise be! Perhaps she could even make him a new cloak. And that's the end of chapter 13. Let's see how long 14 is. Who says we keep going on? Hi, it's JJ. I bet the Roman has been spying on Leia. Oh, that's a possibility. Do, 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 do. Hmm. Interesting possibility. Alrighty. Who says that we read chapter 14? It is 10 pages exactly. So we're a little bit on the low side, and it's early because we started on time tonight almost. So got 4 people here. I know somebody can make a comment. Let me know. Da, 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 da. I love how the brother and sister are growing to love one another. Oh, that's really sweet. The like well, all of the greatest books are really they're really about character development. He's finding a real life that actually matters instead of the life that he had on the mountain. So, and who remembers what their pact is? Um, I think it's for I can't remember exactly what it is. When he and Joel and Thacia got together, they kind of started the thing, and they said they were going to. It was when they first came up with the the psalm, and they said it's for God's glory. I think it's for God's. Don't remember exactly what they said, but they're not doing it for Rosh. They're doing it for God. So whatever they're doing, what can I say except you're welcome? Okay. All right, so I'm going to just keep going. And if somebody wants to stop me, then they can stop me. All right, this is chapter 14. It started with an innocent question. Daniel, what is a wedding? Across the mat, with its earthen dishes, Daniel looked at his sister. They sat late over their morning meal. He knew that the shop door should be open, but he was in no hurry about it. Well into the morning hours he had celebrated the wedding of his new friend Nathan, son of a tax collector. He felt heavy-limbed and slow-witted. He wished Leah would stop prodding him with questions. How pitifully little the girl knew of the world outside their walls. Had their grandmother never talked to her? In the early days, here in Simon's house, he and Leah had eaten their meals and done the work with few words. Then, out of his own loneliness, he had begun to talk as he used to talk to Samson, sorting out his own thoughts aloud, not expecting any response. Leah had listened in silence, as Samson had done, but later she had astonished him by remembering. She had begun to ask questions, odd, childish questions that revealed an incredible ignorance. Lately, since Thacia's visit, there had been altogether too many questions. She wanted to know about the girls he saw in the village, what they wore, what they did in the town, what they talked about. He did his best to answer her, because he could understand how his words were like a window through which she could peek out at the world of people she did not dare to meet face to face. Now, scowling in the effort, he tried to tell her about a wedding. It's a feast, he said slowly, on the day a man takes a bride into his house, when all his friends come to celebrate with him and wish him happiness. Does the bride have friends too? Oh, yes, all making a fuss and talking at once. Did many people come to Nathan's wedding? Well, no, not so many as usual, I guess. Of course, this was the first wedding I've been to since that far-off night when he had carried a torch in his uncle's procession. He hurried on. You see, Nathan is ashamed because his father is already making money from the tax collection, so he refused to let his father give the feast for him. I guess, as weddings go, it was a pretty poor one, but Nathan was satisfied. Did you have good things to eat? Yes, cakes and lots of fruit and grape wine. Curse his selfishness. Couldn't he have brought her a morsel? Tell me about it, Daniel. Her blue eyes sparkled. He wished he had Joel's gift for words. First we went to the bride's house. Her family had many garlands out of flowers. Nathan and Deborah stood in the garden behind the house because the house was too small to fit in so many people. Was the bride pretty? I don't know. I guess Nathan thought so. As pretty as Thacia? For a moment he was disconcerted. Then he remembered that Thacia was the only girl she knew. No, he said honestly. Not so pretty as you, either. What did she wear? Leia looked pleased and flushed. Oh, he floundered, a dress, white I think it was, and a veil over her head, and the flowers. Then we all made a procession to Nathan's new house. There were some little boys who played on pipes, and we all carried torches, and the older people threw rice and grain at the bride. Why? Oh, it's a custom to wish her a fine family, and everyone sang songs and shouted and clapped their hands and stamped their feet. He stopped at the alarm in her eyes. Even the mention of noise terrified her. She could not imagine that noise could be merry. He got to his feet and began to clear away the meal, but Leia did not move, only sat brooding over what he had told her. Finally, she asked, Will Nathan's bride live in his house with him all the time? Of course, just as our mother and father lived in our house. Daniel, she said slowly, when you bring a bride here to live with you, what will happen to me? He was completely taken aback. That's a silly question, he snapped. I'm not going to marry. Why not? Because I have no time for such foolishness. Not till the last Roman is gone from our land. Is Nathan foolish because he has a bride? Daniel felt his good humor sliding away. It is another matter for Nathan. I have taken an oath. I live for just one thing, to rid us of our Roman masters. His voice sounded loud in his own ears. Was he shouting at Leia or himself? Angrily, he began to pull on his cloak. He felt sore, as though she had unexpectedly probed a wound he had not even been aware of. Are the Romans our masters? She asked, her soft voice sounding puzzled. Don't you even know that? She sat silent, but as he opened the door of the shop, he saw that another question was beginning. He did not intend to listen. He had had enough for one morning, but the words caught him with a suddenly flashing net. That soldier, the one who comes into your shop sometimes, the one who rides on the horse, is he a Roman? Yes. May his bones rot. Is he your master then? Ask him. He would say he is. Oh, Daniel, how silly. He is only a boy, not half so big and strong as you, and he is homesick. A fury of impatience seized him. What does it matter how strong he is? He carries a sword. He has the whole Roman army to protect him. Daniel, why are you so angry at the Romans? In a rage of frustration, he glared at her. Because they did this to you, he wanted to shout at her. Because they robbed you of your parents and a decent life and a chance to drink out of the marriage cup that like that girl last night, because they robbed you of everything, all but one thing, a brother to avenge you. Suddenly, all he wanted was to get away from her. He felt choked. A heavy weight he could not understand dragged him, but as he stumbled through the door, he turned back. What made you say he was homesick? Her eyes looked up at him, misty blue. I think he is homesick, she said. She bent and began to roll up the mat. Furious, he slammed the door behind him. Homesick, that stiff-necked son of a camel. But where had she learned the word? He could not put his mind on his work. His head throbbed. Without warning, Leia's childish questions had unleashed all the rebellion he had kept so carefully chained. All day at the forge he thought of the mountain. Twice he laid down the hammer and went to stand in the doorway of Simon's shop, looking up at the line of hills shimmering in the heat against the unbroken blue of the sky. Up until now, he had been able to deal with his restlessness, push it down out of sight, hammer it out with the great blows on the anvil. Today it seized him with the strength of 100 demons. All day he stuck to his work, trying to hammer out his longing on the metal, trying to keep his eyes from the distant hills. In the late afternoon he laid down the hammer, banked the fire carefully with earth as for the Sabbath, and bolted the door of the shop. I must be away tonight, he told Leah. There is food and water, and oil enough to burn all night. You will come back? Could she sense the demons that were driving him? Of course I'll come back. Bar the door when I've gone. He took the road toward the hills. With every step the tiredness went out of him. As he began the long climb he could feel the air growing cooler. A light breeze moved the tops of the cypress trees. With every breath he drew in freedom. How many nights lying on Simon's rooftop had he imagined the moment when he would walk again into the camp? For a few moments it was just as he had pictured it. The shouts, the surprise, the good feeling that he had come home. But the brief excitement soon died down. Rosh, after a sharp demand for news, went back to an oath-studded argument with two of the men. No one else had much to say to him. Daniel wandered about the camp, noticing a few new faces, trying hard to experience the elation he had expected to feel. Then he knew what was missing. He had been watching all the way up the trail for a motion on the hillside above, for a familiar welcoming figure to come bounding down to meet him. Ridiculous. The black man had something better to do than to sit watching for him after all these weeks. But why wasn't Samson somewhere about? The forge had been heated. He could feel the warmth of the stone when he laid his hand against it. How's the village? Asked Jockton, coming in with a load of thorns which he flung down near the fire. There was a hint of hostility, or was it envy, in his voice. Did you bring anything to eat? Daniel looked surprised. He had come away empty-handed, without a thought. We've had trouble getting meat lately, Jockton explained. Some of the shepherds made an ambush. You'd think they'd taken lessons from us. Two of our men got beaten. Bad. The shepherds are in a mean humor, and Rosh ordered us to lay low for a while. Daniel was suddenly uncomfortable. Up here on the mountain he had taken for granted that the flocks that grazed on the slopes were free for the taking. Now he knew by name the men who owned those flocks. They were not wealthy men. Oh well, Jockton said. Rosh won't be patient long. Daniel laughed, pushing away his uneasiness. Where's Samson? He inquired. Jockton shrugged. That's anybody's guess. Samson has his own rules. Rosh lets him? Rosh leaves well enough alone. If you ask me, he's sorry he ever got the brute. But Samson earns his keep. Look, there he is now. Goodness, look what he's brought. The giant stood at the head of the path. Over his shoulder, as easily as a rabbit, was slung the carcass of a sheep that must have weighed more than a man. Swinging it from his shoulders, dropping it to the earth, he stood grinning, looking from man to man, waiting for their praise. With a shout, Daniel sprang forward. At the vast white-toothed smile that split the black face, his own spirits gave an answering leap. For a moment the two stared at one another. Then Samson stepped over the carcass of the sheep. When he would have gone down on his knees, Daniel reached out both hands and grasped the powerful arms and held on hard. They stood grinning at each other wordlessly. Two men had pounced on the carcass and were worrying off the skin with the ferocity of jackals. Others heaped thorn branches on the fire and made ready the spit. Men poured from the cave into the clearing as word of the feast spread. Rosh, glowering from the door of the cave, shrugged his shoulders and said nothing. While the meat was cooking, Daniel debated with himself, was this the time to tell Rosh about his band? But he did not want to spoil the moment when he could confront Rosh with a real army. Besides, he had chosen a poor day to come back. Rosh was obviously out of sorts. Your friend, Joel, Rosh inquired once. Ever see him again? Yes, said Daniel, quite often. Keep an eye on him, Rush growled. I'm going to need him soon. He said no more, and only half listened as Daniel tried to tell him about the move to Simon's shop. Later in the night, Daniel sat watching the thorn fire leaping and crackling. He felt satisfied, full of roasted mutton. He leaned back against the rock, feeling with his shoulder blades for the remembered niches. It's good to be back, he said. Good to be full, Jockton commented, wiping a hand against his grease-smeared chin. We've got you to thank for it. You mean you've got Samson to thank. Samson only did it for you. He knew you were coming all right. He just knows things. He's deaf, maybe, but he hears things that aren't there. Look at him, sitting there staring at you. You think you were one of his gods. You think it's an accident we've had the only good meal in a week? Someone else, too, knew that the meal had been no accident. Glancing at Rosh, Daniel saw the small eyes above the unkempt tangles of black beard glittering at Samson. The dislike in them startled him. Rosh had gorged himself on the forbidden mutton, but he hadn't forgiven the one man in the camp who had dared to flout his orders. Later, still Daniel lay awake. Overhead the stars were big and close, the cool air was clean, free of the mists and the taint of the town. He lay filled with meat and wine, his old comrades stretched out beside him. It was all just as he had imagined it on those endless steaming nights in the town, yet sleep did not come. He turned over, twisting his shoulders to fit a hump in the rocky ground. In these few weeks his body had forgotten the feel of pebbles. In the same way his mind shifted uncomfortably, trying to find a resting place. Pictures began to form in his memory, Leah alone behind a bolted door. Joel reading aloud from the scroll, Thacia standing in the doorway of the smithy in her striped headdress, Simon looking away down the road, waiting for Daniel to accept the offer of all he owned. Simon had chosen a different leader. Daniel thought now of the one meal he had shared with Simon's comrades. He remembered the silence as Jesus had stood to bless the meager feast, and how each one had taken less than he needed so that those outside could be fed. A closeness had seemed to draw them all together. Tonight, who but Samson cared that he had come back? All at once he thought of Leah's little black goat. Would some child in the village be hungry because of tonight's feast? At the first gray glimmer he got up. Instantly Samson was awake. Daniel put a hand on his shoulder. For a moment he stood, shaken by the question that stared from the dark eyes. Then he shook his head and made his way among the sleeping figures to the top of the trail. Samson did not try to follow him. He wished he could take the black man with him, but how could that huge figure fit into the narrow cage of his life at the smithy? Samson would alarm the villagers and terrify Leah into a corner forever. No, Samson belonged to the free life on the mountain. Where did he himself belong? The fire in Simon's forge had almost gone out. He raked back the ashes, blew on the coals, and coaxed it back to life. Then he opened the inner door to the house. Leah looked up at him, her blue eyes as lifeless as the fire. She had not combed her hair or bothered to get herself breakfast. With irritation he saw that the water jar was empty, and that he would have to stand in line at the well with the snickering women. He bent and picked up the jar, and the bars of his cage slid into place around him. That's where we're going to stop it for the night. We are at 1 hour, and I hope that you are enjoying the story. Um, we do have probably at the most a week, but it's probably more like, oh, I just lost my place. Probably more like 4 or 5 days of reading left of this book, and then we're going to pick a book from Robert Louis Stevenson, I think is who we're going to go with. And so it's going to be either Kidnapped or Treasure Island. So be thinking about which one that you think that would be more appropriate or better for me to read. Both of them are fun. I've read both of them and they're both fun and I like them. So, but I'm only going to read one of them for now. We might read the other one sometime next year or something. Anyway, I'm mostly just rambling right now because I know that if I hit end live video, which is what the button says at the bottom of the screen, then it will, I think it's for God's victory, not for Israel's victory. I know that if I hit the button, then it instantly stops your live stream, and then it takes a little while for Facebook to process the video before it's available. So that's why I kind of ramble at the end of these. So I hope everything is going well. Looks like you guys are finished now with listening to it, so I'm gonna go ahead and skedat. And I hope that you guys have a wonderful evening, and we'll look forward to tomorrow night when we get to read another couple of chapters of the Bronze Bow and another chapter of Mark. And God bless you and have a good night. We'll see you tomorrow.